Hello everyone and welcome to the Deserts of Kharak lore series. In this series I'll be going through all the lore available for Deserts of Kharak and basically telling you about it, maybe speculating a little bit, just reading through it for the most part with you guys. So we start off with part 1, Karak itself, the hot little planet that is located on the inner edge of its habitability zone for its star. That means basically that it's barely within the zone where a planet can support human life, at least as far as we know it. The planet itself, Karak, is about 7,000 kilometers in diameter, which compares to the Earth with 12,742 kilometers, so it's a fair bit smaller. Not only that, it also has a lower density and is actually the older of the two planets. Karak comes in at around 6.7 billion years of age, while the Earth is about 4.5 billion years. The population on Earth is, as you can imagine, massively higher. Karak only currently supports about 293 million people. That isn't exactly a small number, but compared to other habitable planets, this is understandably a low number. Karak's proximity to its sun actually makes it so that around the equator the temperatures reach the boiling point for water, and only the polar regions are actually what we would consider a moderate climate. The desertification of the planet has over the last 250 million years killed off millions of various species on the planet, and only those adapted to desert life, for the most part at least, remain. Karak is also a highly dangerous planet just from its environment. Not just the heat, but the sand and the storms themselves also play a huge part in the dangers that present themselves to the people of the planet. The sand, for example, can start to shift several hundred meters per second under the right circumstances. There have been known incidents of entire large family groups suddenly just vanishing, swallowed whole by the desert sands. In addition to that, there are also large sandstorms that mostly originate in the southern hemisphere, where nearly a fourth of the planet's surface is a simple flat reflective surface of sand that massively helps in the generation of these superstorms. One of the largest such storms was actually the downfall of the Ifrit Nabal, which we found in the second mission or third mission of the campaign. That particular storm covered the whole southern hemisphere of the planet in 13 days of continuous sandstorm. After the Age of Reason started on Karak, scientists have found out a variety of interesting and dangerous things as well. The Kiith, for example, are not natives of Karak. They have been placed here, they are strangers. They only share common DNA with a couple bacteria and a small rodent that probably arrived with them somehow. The more terrifying discovery is that the deserts of Karak expand much faster than scientists thought. After building a satellite network that gave them much more information as well as the location of the Jaraci Artifact, it has been found out that the desert advances at 10 times the rate they predicted. Not only that, the aquifers which make the land in the north and the south arable are draining at 6 times the projected rate. In short, within a few centuries the planet will not be able to sustain human life. And the Kiithid will die out if they remain here. Now we come to part 2, the social structure of the people of Karak. On Karak there are extended family groups numbering in the thousands that are called Kiith or Kiithid in plural. Archaeologists have found out over the course of time that this dates back to the very beginning of recorded history, so this configuration is more than 1,000 years old. Every Kiith also has a loose hierarchy based on social position within the family. Originally this was purely a measure of seniority, though that has changed over time to be more of a measure of influence than age. Within the loose hierarchy there is a primary and a secondary family, as well as all the other subservient families, though subservient may be too strong a word here. The primary family are the Kiith Tsar, and they are the rulers of the whole Kiith. The secondary family is responsible for essentially all the judge stuff. They're doing hearings and arbitrating disputes between various members of the Kiith, and the lesser families are all those that have sworn allegiance to the primary family. Individuals and whole families can change their allegiance, though that is not an easy thing to do. It was harder in older times, but nowadays it's much less of a hassle. Additionally, a family's position can change with how many others swear allegiance to them, and in some cases this can even lead to the creation of new kith. In older times, a kith Tsar was able to leverage single-handedly the entire political power of his people. He could demand families to dedicate time and finances to a project, or even move kith around to other regions. Nowadays, the Kith Tsar is mostly a political and financial leader though, and acts on the will of the people, which is established by referendums. From time to time, the Kith Tsar from the various Kiithid across Kharak, with some exceptions like the Galcian, meet in the Great Diamid within Tyr to debate the global policy and resolve legal troubles between the Kiithids. Another important social aspect of Kiithid life is that most Kiithid concentrate their power in one or two particular disciplines in which they excel. They gather families which similarly are at home in that field under their banner. Examples would include, for example, that the Sejet are mostly scientific people, while the Soban are much better as warriors. A bonded couple that would, for example, have an interest in joining the sciences would apply to a Sejet family associated with a laboratory. In older times, the Kiithid invested most power into the collective whole. The Kiithid itself was more important than the individual, but that kind of switched around over time. In the modern era, the Kiithid have slowly transferred the power to the individual, though the Kiithid is still of vital importance to them and a means of social identity. The last big noteworthy thing about the social systems of Karak is the religious belief. Most people once believed, and a lot still do, that they were put on Karak by the great maker Seljuk, whose hand shapes what is. Religious discussions rarely were about if the god existed. It was more a question of why he would put his people on a planet like this. Most people preach a dogma of repentance. Essentially, they were put here by their god as a punishment for something, and two sects in particular, the Galcian and the Sedim, have had a very hardline approach to this particular dogma. The various religious interpretations and dogmas led essentially to a fair bit of persecution and warfare over time, though in the modern era that has mostly fallen by the wayside, with only a few very important Kiithid still essentially practicing holy warfare. Most of all the Galcian, who have fled the home among other people long ago to essentially perpetuate what I would call an eternal war against all other Kiithid. We'll learn more about that in a moment. Now we come to part 3, a rough history of Karak. Historic dates are written down in the dating system of KDS, which I do not exactly know what it stands for. It was established by some Sejet scribes back in the day, and 0 KDS marks the time when it was first put into proper use by them. The first major entry comes from 340 KDS. It is about Kith Manan, the Travelers, and that they were first mentioned at this time. We'll learn more in depth about them later, but for now they are essentially a nomadic tribe that deals not in goods but mostly in entertainment. They had a rather bad reputation for a long while, and you'll get to know why later. In 416 KDS then, the Grey Brotherhood was founded. The Grey Brotherhood is a different name for Kith Soban. They essentially are mercenaries and fighters extraordinaire, and you'll learn more about them later as well. They self-rejected the Kith they belonged to because their children and family members were killed by a rival, and their overlords would not retaliate against the attackers, and as such, their leader, who was named Soban, decided to no longer belong to any Kiithid, but the Kiithid of Spirit. Again, we'll learn more about that later. In 462 KDS, an important event happened. The Sedim Council proclaimed that only Kith Sedim are of divine origin, and that all other Kiithid across Karak are named Gretidim, which means essentially sent people, and were thus qualified as lesser people, which led to a great many atrocities in that time. One such atrocity came in 488 KDS. Kiith Paktu was a Kiith that lived along the headwaters of a river or sea, and the Sidim proclaimed that only the Sidim could live in such places. They attacked Kiith Paktu and drove them out of their ancestral homelands. Just 2 years later, some members of the Paktu Kiith, about 50 families, decided to try the unthinkable. They built some sand sailors and tried to cross the Great Banded Desert in hopes of reaching the southern pole. They managed to do that. Only 17 families survived though. Following their arrival, they rebuilt for 3 years, and when they were stable again, their leader and another few members of various families decided to set out northward again to tell the people of the peace they found in the south. The next event, in 513 KDS, is again about the Sidim and Kiith Manani. Essentially the Manani, as I mentioned before, were wanderers, and they took a rather comfortable approach to life. They were singers and dancers, performers, maybe even thieves at times. And that didn't fit with the theology the Sidim and the Galcian had constructed for themselves, so to speak. They still thought that being on the planet was punishment by the gods, and a careless, carefree clan of travelers was just anathema to their view on life. Even though they were nomadic, the Kiith Manan had a single place where they would meet once a year, the dancing grounds, where there would be no bloodshed allowed and there would only be joyous partying and comfortable living there. And when that event happened, the Sidim took some military forces and tried to murder them to the last man. 7 years later, in 520 KDS, the Heresy Wars would begin. They would last for about 300 years, and it was the war between the two largest Kiith at the time, the Sidim and the Galcian, going to war over what caused the gods to place the people on such an inhospitable world. It was a religious war like none had ever seen before, and it would last to nearly destroy Karak. Much later then, in 652 KDS, the Sidim finally got upset enough with the southern people that had fled their reign long ago that they would try to send their first assault down to the south. In total, over the course of history, they sent 3 such assaults, and all of them failed against the dedicated Paktu defenders and their allies in the south. Following the destruction and murder at the dancing grounds I mentioned just a short while before, Kiith Manan turned to warfare. They decided to take out the Sidim wherever they could and became raiders. Even though they were a nomadic kin, it kind of suited them for a while, but their bloodthirst came to an end about 100 years later. Their leader at the time, Jora Manan, declared an end to their Kiith's war against the Sidim, and they now focused exclusively on trade. They would build a new dancing ground around the same time, which was though established far in the south in Paktu territory this time, far away from the reach of the Sidim. 717 KDS saw one of the great atrocities of its time. Kiith Galcian, under orders of their leader, began blowing up the series of defenses against the deserts, wind baffles, dikes, sandpaths that protected the primary city on the planet, the capital so to speak, the temple city of Sajukar. The city was considered the artistic gem of Karak, and within a day after the attacks it was buried under the sand, killing thousands in the mass evacuations. Directly following that, Kiith Galcian retreated into the desert wastelands, abandoning the north, claiming that its decadence would eventually bring the wrath of Seljuk upon them all. 7 years later, Kiith Galcian was convicted internationally in absentia and deemed an outlaw Kiith. The year 810 KDS saw probably one of the most important events in Karakian history. It was Kiith Nabal who emerged from the valley enclave of Tyr, exposing Karak to new advanced sciences and technology not known before. Kiith Nabal had long hidden away in their secret valley city, and there they had made great strides in technology and sciences. When Nabal forces finally moved out, they had steam power and repeater rifles at their disposal, far outclassing everything else other Kiithid at the time had at their disposal. The Nabal intervention and the free spreading of technology they allowed along all they liberated would finally put an end to the heresy wars, nearly 300 years of religious warfare. We will learn more about that in the next episode when we talk about the Nabal Kiith. 20 years after the emergence of Kiith Nabal in 830 KDS, the Age of Reason begins. The capital of Karak is moved to the Nabal home base in Tyr. In 1024 KDS, Karak's first orbital flight is launched. Many people still consider spaceflight a taboo at this point, and protest can be felt throughout the population. In 1057 KDS, after many years of increasing hostility out of the desert by Kithgalsian, Project Stormbreaker is launched by the Northern Coalition. It is supposed to be a giant ridge of sand battle walls, a full kilometer wide and thousands kilometer long, circling the entire lower face of the Barrier Mountains. It is hoped that this wall would hold back the advancing desert and Kithgalsian. In the year 1061 KDS, during a manned spaceflight, crew members discover floating debris in orbit. The debris is metallic, but the atomic composition shares no similarities at all with anything known to exist on Karak. The discovery and study of the space debris leads to massive scientific advances in metallurgy and manufacturing. Fission and fusion power plants are discovered along that line. In 1074 KDS, the Night of Fiery Daggers, called Sifar Korshesh, happens. It is an attack by over 10,000 Galsian soldiers on the twin forts along the Stormbreaker wall, a last-ditch effort to keep the wall from being completed. The attack fails. We will learn more about that particular piece of history a little bit later. In 1100 KDS, the Sajet institute a new orbital sensor system with the purpose of sweeping the space around Karak for hundreds of millions of kilometers. It is called Project Vinkel. 6 years after the institution of the Vinkel satellite program, Labyak Jaraci, working on malfunctioning satellite, accidentally points one of the satellites on Karak and detects hundreds of anomalies scattered across the Great Banded Desert. One of the signals he detects rivals the sun of Karak itself. Initially referred to as the Jaraci object, it soon becomes known as the primary anomaly. As soon as the presence of the Jaraci object becomes known to the powers that be, Operation Skalbri is launched. It is a deep desert expedition aimed at claiming the Jaraci object for the Northern Coalition. Less than a month after starting, all contact is lost with the carrier Ifrit Nabal. Planning and design for a second expedition is approved by the Diemit. Construction of a new Sakala-class deep desert carrier is accelerated. In 1108 KDS, the search for survivors of the Skalbri expedition is called off. The flagship Ifrit Nabal and her crew are declared lost. In 1109 KDS, the first Sakala-class deep desert carrier rolls off the production line. Addressing all of the shortcomings of its predecessor, the new carrier moves faster, lasts longer, and hits harder than the Ifrit Nabal heavy carrier. In 1109 KDS, the Sajet carrier Kapisi is put into service. 1 year later, in 1110 KDS, Operation Khadim, the second Jaraci expedition, is cleared to launch. With the history of Karak now explored, at least in some detail, we will end this episode here. I do thank you all for watching and hope you found this interesting. I certainly found it very interesting and very enlightening on the whole matter of Homeworld itself. I'm looking forward to more episodes of this where I can explore the Kiithid and some more important historic events such as the Night of Fiery Daggers I mentioned earlier. With that said, thanks again for watching, I hope to see you the next time. Bye bye.